Hi, good evening. Once again, it's Thursday. It's 5 o'clock, and if you're here on Instagram and you're here with us with the American Artist Professional League, I am John Bandish. I am still the social media director with the American Artist Professional League, and it's right back to our time with interviewing you, the members of the American Artist Professional League. Tonight, gonna be a lot of fun. It's gonna be extra special because it's two Philly guys talking about art, talking about all things Philly and the Jersey Shore. It's gonna be a blast. Steve is an amazing, amazing painter. Cannot wait. There he is. I see him waving in now. Uh, Hello from Kutztown, PA. We've got Kutztown. Her mom lives like maybe 10 minutes away from Kutztown. I have a couple of tattoos that I got in downtown Kutztown. So we have a whole lot of Pennsylvania going on right now. And there's Steve. Hey,
Hey John, what's going on? How you doing?
good. How you doing? This is the magic of the internet. Sometimes this works really fast, and I have to prepare for some long intro and just sort of go off the fly. And then there's other times where, boom, it works right
Right
away.
on. It's all
Oh,
good. Good
you
to see
have
you.
got that painting behind you. Oh my God. Pardon me for a second here, everybody, because I am looking at this and what a visual treat your work is. No pun
Thank you.
intended for all the food, right? But
Exactly. Yeah. So I figured there'd be some things in there that you'd like. It's called Taste of Home. So it's got stuff from
well,
our
I
general
think I
area.
think I'd be a little happier if I saw Mac and Manco pizza box somewhere scattered in there,
Uh,
but we can get to
that's
that later on.
exactly right. So I have back and Mancos in a couple of my paintings from the Jersey Shore. So it's something I noticed about your artwork too. I saw the Manco and Mancos or Mac and Mancos. I'm like, right on, man. We have there's a common bond there.
I have a
So
funny anecdote to that. I There's a boardwalk art show in Ocean City, New Jersey, in August, and I used to do that show. I haven't done it for a few years just because of life in general.
yeah,
But I had a print that I wanted to give to them, and I said like one of the guys walked past, and I said like, hey, is there like a some kind of manager or somebody that I can talk to? Just I don't want anything for it. It's matted, framed here. Just put it on the wall. Like that's super cool. I was like, even if you do it for 5 minutes and take it down, right?
right on.
And he was all excited about it, and he came back and he said, I'm not allowed to because it said Mac and
Yeah,
Manco. He goes, but if you had one that said
uh,
Manco and Manco, and I
Manco.
went, okay.
Yeah. That's it. I actually did a painting a number of years ago of the boardwalk in Ocean City, and it was right where the movie theater was, and I I couldn't do a painting of the boardwalk and not have Mac and Mancos in there. So I actually put it in, and anybody who knows the area knows that that's wrong. It doesn't belong there, but I put it in just to make sure that it was there. And now they moved into the movie theater location, so it was kind of almost a premonition. They eventually moved. Close to where it was in that painting.
Well, and it makes sense for anybody that doesn't know what we're talking about. It is absolutely the best pizza on the East Coast, hands down, without a
Fantastic.
shadow of a doubt. If you find yourself in the Jersey Shore, head down to Ocean City, New Jersey. There's a couple of locations. They're in Somers Point. If you're in Philly and you go to the ballpark to watch the Fightins, you'll definitely be able to grab a slice there now, which is really awesome.
Yeah, the
But
sauce
let's
on
dive
top.
into this.
Yeah,
So,
right on.
all right. So basically, for everybody out there that doesn't know who you are, why don't you give us a little bit of an introduction? Well, you're obviously from and in Philly, and then where did you go to school? Just give ourselves a little intro.
Sure. Yeah, my name is Steve Scheuring. When I'm talking to people outside of the area, I say I'm from around Philadelphia. I grew up in Reading, Pennsylvania. I live in Douglasville, Pennsylvania now, which is between Reading and King of Prussia, so it takes me about 40 minutes ish to get into the city. Um, I started drawing and painting as a little kid, as I'm sure most artists have. I had an uncle who's between my mom's age and my age who gave me his Mad magazines and his comic books when I was a kid, and I was obsessed. I to this day still know more about the politics of the '60s and '70s from the Mad magazines than I do about what's going on today. I wore them out, just folding the back covers and reading them. And that same uncle turned me on to a fantasy artist, Frank Frazetta, who, for those
Oh
who
yeah,
aren't familiar with him, he did the
awesome
Molly Hatchet
album
album.
covers.
Yeah, he's the guy who designed Conan the Barbarian. You know, for those who don't know, like the old books, Conan looked like Buck Rogers, kind of dun dun dun, but Frazetta really gave him the long hair and that barbarian look. And when they talk about illustration, they talk about the golden age down in Delaware. And then they talk about, for imaginative realism, it's that gold Pyle and NC Wyeth and that whole crew. And then they get into pre-Frazetta and post-Frazetta. He was that instrumental that they talk about it in that kind of a light. And I got a book of his work from my uncle when I was a kid. And I just sat there and I just copied and copied and copied his stuff when I was a kid. And that got me going. I wanted to be an artist when I was young, but then my parents worked unbelievably hard. And I just looked at it and I'm like, I'm not sure how practical that is. That's what I was thinking at the time. So I actually went into advertising because I figured it was a creative side of business and came out of college at Penn State. I'm self-taught. I had one class right before I graduated with Santa Barasa, and she basically just set up still lifes and said, go and start painting. So I did a little bit of painting in college. To this day, I have a job that I work at in the gas industry. I started in the industrial gas industry out of college, and I've been working in that industry ever since. I'm a vice president of sales operations with an industrial gas company, and I paint at night on the weekends at odd times. And it's interesting because I think there's a lot of that fuels a lot of my artwork fuels my work, and my work fuels my artwork. I learn a lot about both um, through the process. But again, in 2003, I wasn't doing a whole lot of work, but I'd always tell people I'm an artist. And I kind of felt a little shamed about it. I was saying I was an artist, but I really wasn't doing a lot of work. In 2003, I took a trip to Paris with my wife and with the Louvre and Musée d'Orsay, and it was like, all right, I gotta do this. And at that point, I committed, and I've had something on the easel ever since. It's been a nonstop whirlwind ever since. And I do portraits, landscapes, but I think what I'm people look at it and say, yeah, if we know that guy, what they know me for, kind of the real complex still life paintings, that's where I'm having a lot of fun and get a lot of interest right now.
All right. Well, first off, there's a ton to unpack here. All right. So we're going to start off with one more little personal anecdote. I know Douglasville very well because it's at the very end of 422 where it stops being a highway and just a regular road.
Right on.
I used to go out that way all the time, visiting my wife when she still lived with her parents, right there in suburban Reading, so not far from you. So got a whole lot in common with that. I've probably driven past your house and didn't even know it.
Probably did.
Douglasville's not exactly a big town.
Yeah,
so,
that's it. When I'm with people throughout the U.S., they're like, Douglasville, where's that? I'm like, you ever hear of Daniel Boone? I live right by his homestead,
by
and
the
they're like,
homestead, right?
yeah,
Which is
so
right where
I'm
that
very
Wawa
close.
is, and I always knew if I could just get to the Wawa, you can at least fill up on gas or whatever. So,
Right
a
on.
little funny anecdote. That's really awesome. So,
Next time
so
you're in the area, got to
I was
stop by.
going to say, I know I'll be up that way. I think in a few weeks. I have to talk to my wife about that one, but we'll definitely have to connect and get together.
Well, I have to hook you up with a Berks County cheesesteak, so that's a little bit different than a Philly
Oh,
cheesesteak. You'll
well, I'm all game for that.
right on,
You'll never get me to say no to that.
right on.
So back to the art now, though.
Yeah.
So what it sounds like, it's kind of a common tale in the sense that always had this, this itch, if you will, this urge to be creative, to
Yeah.
draw and paint. It was always there. But life, as it sometimes happens, gets in the way, right? There's a practicality behind this, right?
Yeah.
In a personal sense, it kind of kills me a little bit inside, just because of how the arts historically are not presented as a viable option for a vocation.
Yeah.
When in the reality is that there's tons of opportunities that's out there to be a successful, we'll say, business in that sense. And then, to think of all of the creativity that has been lost over the years with people that, said, well, I'll come back to it later in life. And of course, life happens, right?
Yeah.
But you were one of the kind of that grouping of people that said, No, 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 no. I am not giving up on this. I am an artist. It just happens that I happen to have a day job. So
Hmm.
you go to Paris
Yeah,
and you say basically, no, that's it. Which, if anybody that's out there that's never walked into the Musée d'Orsay, right? And I'm not saying anything bad about the Louvre. Personally, when I walked into the Musée d'Orsay for the first time, I went, "This is the place to be in Paris." Like, if
sure.
you're in Paris and that's what you want to go, that's where you got to go, right?
Yeah.
So, is there something? Is there like a moment? Is there a particular painting, maybe, or some grouping of work that when you saw that you were like, "That's it."
The thing that made the biggest impression on me at the Louvre, seeing that hall of the very giant paintings, I was just looking at that like, wow, this absolutely blew me away. I think also seeing Rodin's Gates of Hell at Musée d'Orsay, that kind of blew my mind a little bit. And there was that entire trip, seeing some of the Vermeers in the Louvre. Also, I mean, you don't have an opportunity to see too many of those. That woke me up a little bit. But then, coincidentally, at that same time, I reconnected with that uncle that I hadn't seen since I was a kid, and I saw he was painting. And it was just a combination of all those factors at the same time. Just kind of said, God, I gotta feed the itch. I gotta get back to this. And I think the other thing that happened too, not too long before that, we had lived in Houston, Texas for a few years. We moved back to the area, bought a house, and I had all this wall space. And I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna make the stuff for my own walls. You know, why go out and buy art when I can make my own? And my kids were young at that time, and just the kids were so inspiring as well. I think, taking vacations, going down to the Jersey Shore with them, seeing them, on rides, the Wonderland Pier, just really got everything flowing, got all the juices flowing, and that got me back into it.
Oh, that's well. So I mean, I just have to say, this is funny because there's a lot of interpersonal connections that are happening
Sure,
right now, and it's fun for me because that's really what so much of my work is all about are those memories, right? There's shared
sure.
memories that people have. Um, I'll say specifically in the Jersey Shore, but really kind of I guess anywhere, at least we'll talk about the East Coast, as far as summer at the beach. What does that look
Sure.
like? It's ice cream cones melting down your hand, like what I've got on the easel behind me right here.
Right on.
So super cool to hear about that, right? So let's kind of like take that. So like, there's the crux, right, if you will, of this is why I want to do what I want to do. How did it evolve into these amazing still lifes like what you have behind you? Because
Yeah.
there's a little bit of a gap there. Was that something that became intentional? Was there something specific that kind of that you're
Yeah.
after in that way?
Yeah, there was an incident that kind of triggered it all, and it snowballed after there. It's been building ever since. When my kids were little, I had done portraits of. I have three children that are grown. My daughter Sarah and Emily. I had done portraits of them, and I wanted to do a portrait of my son Cole. And a little context here, a week before the incident I'm about to describe, my wife and I and some friends went to MoMA in New York City. And I remember coming back from that, just remembering saying, boy, there's a lot of modern art that are grids of colors in different styles and forms, but I'm not saying that good or bad, made an impression on me. It was like, boy, I saw a lot of grids of color, and it stuck with me. And as I'm at my house, my son, he was, a toddler. He's in dinosaur pajamas, and we're playing with Hot Wheels in our basement. And the way we had him set up, we had a really long track and books in the center. And I would shoot cars down to him, and he would collect them, and then he would shoot the cars back to me. And he did something that I remember doing as a kid. He bent over and he's like looking up the track because he wanted to see what the cars looked like as they took off in the distance. And in his little dinosaur pajamas, I'm thinking, oh, this is the portrait. I'm like, don't move. And I went and grabbed a camera and I started taking pictures, and the pictures aren't looking anything like what I was envisioning this portrait in my head. It just wasn't working. But then I'm looking and I notice when he's taking the cars, he would line them up in a little parking lot. You know, he'd make them nice and even like they're in a parking lot. And I'm looking down and I'm like, there's a grid of color. And it struck me at that point, like, why don't I do something that is a grid of color, but do it very realistically with cars? And it led to one of my first paintings in this style, and it was called Jam. And it was in a grid, but as I'm filling it taking photographs of it top down just to work on the composition, it was boring to me. It didn't work. So I tilted it on an angle and painted it. And that painting took third place in an international artist still life competition in their magazine. So at that point, I'm like, ooh, that got a little bit of notice. I'm kind of, maybe I'm onto something there. I then thought, well, what would it be like if I did a Jackson Pollock with Hot Wheels? And that led to a painting that I did called Crash, where it's just this giant pile of cars in a very broad landscape. And I intended to be totally random, but there is a little bit of a pyramidal composition to it. That painting was up at being displayed at the Allentown Art Museum, and they asked me to come up and do a talk. And the guy who was at the museum said, you know, this guy really likes to explore form. He uses repeating forms. And it's like, I wasn't consciously doing that, but it was interesting to hear his take on my work. And it got me to thinking about repeating forms. And I'm like, well, I'm not really a car head. I was doing it just because it at the moment, but what is the most interesting form? I think it's, the human body, people. So I said, okay, well, what if I then do something like this with bodies? And I started thinking about toys, and I started thinking about toy soldiers. And I did this painting called A Pile of Soldiers that has actually, it's kind of interesting. There's a couple of old Frank Frazetta Blazing Combat comic book covers in there, and G.I. Joes, and old wooden soldiers and little toy soldiers. And just the idea that I like that there was kind of you could read the painting a couple of different ways. You could look at it as just simple nostalgia around toy soldiers, or just the idea of a pile of soldiers and children playing with soldiers, and that such a heavy idea. And I'm not making a big political statement there, but just that there's a little bit of a tension or an uneasiness there. And that painting started getting noticed, and then it just kind of blossomed from there. I just kept doing very complex still lifes, and some of them will have a little bit more context and meaning to them.
Wow, that's awesome. So this is great. One of the elements to this interview series that kind of organically happened was people sending us messages saying, "Hey, I'm younger, or I'm older, but I'm trying to get into this. Is there any kind of context of like how do you become whatever it is that you're looking to become?" And this is a great anecdotal storyline, almost like a storyboard, where you can sit there and pinpoint this work led to this, to this, to this, to this.
Yeah,
That's fantastic, right? So, boy, there's like a million
yeah.
questions I want to ask now that kind of dovetail with
I,
that. But
I do think that Chuck Close had it right when he said that inspiration is for amateurs. You really want to come up with ideas. Work, paint, the ideas that I have more ideas than I have time to get them done in the rest of my life. And I when I do have an idea, I take a note on it. But it's interesting. A lot of those ideas come through the work. As I'm sitting there pondering what I'm doing, a different idea comes through the work. And for advice for the newer folks out there, don't sit back and wait for it to happen. Get to work, and that's where the ideas are going to start to come.
it's funny you referenced Chuck Close. I had a professor in undergrad who would say, paraphrasing his words, but basically to the effect of, it's better to make a bad painting and learn from it than to make nothing at all and learn nothing at all, right?
Right
Like,
on.
get out and get to work, right? And that Chuck Close quote is definitely something that's always in the back of mind. Like, don't just get to work.
Yeah. There's
Right.
so many parallels to that in outside of art as well
Oh,
too. I
well,
find
yeah,
that in the daily work.
not just for the studio per se, but in general, right?
Right on.
It's easy to sit back on your laurels, so to speak. But I see Sherry Mason's commenting, "Amen." Hey, Sherry. And again, if you're tuning in and watching us, whether you're watching us live right now or you're watching this later on here on Instagram, we'll be posting these again on YouTube. Our IT director, Nancy, was helping out with that before. Thank you again for tuning in every Thursday at 5 o'clock. We're going to come to here with you, the members of the American Artists Professional League. We're talking with Steve here tonight. Okay, so here we are now, right? So we've gone from we have our day job, family man, 3 kids. Which, by the way, my hat is off to you. I have 1, and I can barely keep up with him. I don't know how you did 2 more.
Congratulations.
And then 2 girls at that. I think I'm already going gray. I think I'd already be gray if that was me. But so you've come into this now. You've had some success. You're winning awards. You're winning some distinction in shows, and you're saying to yourself, at least I assume here for a moment, man, like, okay, let's dive into this head first. Is that kind of what happened? You just said, I'm doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, at that point, I made that commitment to myself that I would never stop. And the more I started entering shows, the more I started putting my work out there, the more notice I started getting, the more inquiries I started getting, and it started snowballing from there. It wasn't like one big moment. It just has gradually started to snowball. I had my first show, solo show, a few years ago. And what was really nice about that, the guy who did the review of the show compared me to a few other artists, and one was Gary Urbe, who's a Trump lay artist out of North Jersey, out of New York. And so I took the opportunity to send him a note, and so I've been able to keep a nice dialogue going with him and get some pointers and lessons from him. And just everything just leads to something. I can't look and point at a big moment. It's all just been a gradual snowballing. But the more you work, the more good things happen.
Well, and I think that's as far as advice to like a younger person or somebody maybe they're later in life that's just getting started. I think that it's a continued message that I know I've been preaching here on this interview series. I'm here because I answered an email from the board of directors saying, hey, you guys have these positions, which I have no skill sets whatsoever for those positions, but if you need help with something, I'm happy to help. Lo and behold, they had this opportunity. It's all kind of worked out, and boom, Bob's your uncle, so to speak. But that being said, it goes right in line with what you're saying, which is put yourself out there. Don't be afraid of the risk of trying and failing. Failing is actually some of the best things. I love when I don't get accepted to something, because then it either, and it's one thing about us with the AAPL where if you apply for something specifically in the sense of the different levels of membership that we have, and let's say you don't get it, we give you information as to why, right? And there's nothing that says you can't reach out to and say, hey, I applied for this, I didn't get in. Is there any kind of pointers?
Right.
And even if you don't have somebody else giving you that, right, that inner self, that reflection, those moments of saying, let me sit and look at this and see to myself, what could I have done differently or better, right?
Sure.
How do I get better? How do I learn from this, right?
Sure.
That's sometimes when you have a lot of success, quote unquote, whatever that may be or whatever, you get accepted to things, or it's almost kind of like a bad thing, because then you sit back and say, oh, hey, I'm doing pretty good. All right, I guess I can just kind of hang out for a little bit and do what I'm doing. But the truth of the matter is, the devil rests on an idle mind, right? I love that old phrase, right? To keep going, right? Push yourself.
Yeah.
It's
interesting. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Let me ask a pointed question here
Sure.
about this. And I'm going to make an educated guess and say, I think it's a lot. You probably spend more time looking at the work than you do actually doing the work.
Boy, you hit on. I was going right there with you, so we're in lockstep. It's really interesting in that in my day job, I work with a lot of salespeople in this company, and it's a very complex process. And I often use the phrase when I'm working with our folks in the company, there's a reason that you've been given 2 ears and 1 mouth. Because a lot of people think that in the world of sales, it's all about having the gift of gab. And that has absolutely nothing to do with it. It's all about your ability to actively listen if you're really trying to help somebody. and really provide value, it's going to come through their truly understanding them and what their situation is and what's going on. So that idea of taking that breath and really actively listening, not just listening to what you're hearing on the surface, but that context underneath is so critically important. I find for the style of work that I do, the ability to observe is so critical, and that's one of those parallels that keeps feeding, from my work to the art, from my art to the work, and that level of observation. It's not, what do I see? It's what, not what I think I see, but what do I really see when I'm looking at it? And, when you're looking at something, it's like, that can't be, that doesn't feel right, but you're looking at it and trusting that. And sometimes listening to that and saying, boy, I'm seeing something there that there's a reflection coming off of there that's giving something that I don't expect. But, our minds are so trained to fill in the pieces that you almost have to stop sometimes and you say, what is it that I'm really observing here? And, I tell myself that during the day when I'm working, and I tell that myself that when I'm in the studio. Those lessons keep feeding each other back and forth.
Oh yeah, yeah. I was just in Florida at a show and talking with some other artists and two new collectors of mine. Yippee to that, right? About that being the most important part of the process. There are times where I have to take a painting and turn it around, put it back, and not look at it for a while to be able to come back with fresh eyes. I
Sure.
imagine that's something similar sometimes for you.
Yeah.
There's
Look
so
at
much
it in
going on
the mirror.
compositionally.
Sure.
You need a visual break.
Yeah, absolutely. And you do need to take things and break them down into smaller pieces. Sometimes you need to look at it in a mirror in reverse and to change your perspective and see things in a different way. And sometimes it's funny, you step away from something and come back to it in a while, and your eye will go right to something that subconsciously was bothering you. But you look at it, it's like, okay, I just need to do bing, 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 and it can go in and make changes that'll have a radical impact on the success of the painting. So yeah, it is. Sometimes you get so close to something that all of those thoughts and biases on what you see impact it. I used to think when I was earlier on in my career, I thought it's not about what you're painting. They're all just shapes and colors and tones. I was so wrong about that. When I was working on A Pile of Soldiers, I started painting a couple of faces and I was doing it upside down, and it was driving me crazy. I kept finding myself having to turn them right side up in order to look at the face, because I was, I had them in different positions, somewhere upside down, and just painting them upside down was, I kept finding myself doing this thing to try to see what they look like. So I do still think though that the smearing the paint is secondary. I think the ability to see and that ability to compare, warmer, cooler, brighter, lighter, darker, and I think, I heard in your last interview talking about the ability to draw. Yeah, drawing skills are so foundational, so fundamental.
It's funny in the context of what we're talking about. I have a memory, a painful memory at that from undergrad. It's like burned into my being of a professor. I won't divulge their name because I don't want them to come back at me and laugh at me a little hard. Because whenever you thought you had a good drawing, this professor would come up with a mirror and make you stand and look at the mirror, and at 10 times out of 10 there was always something wrong with your drawing, and the mirror doesn't lie. It's going to
Right,
tell you right off the bat, and then once you see it you can't unsee it,
right,
right? And
absolutely.
it's just those kinds of observational skills. So I take pictures with my phone now, with in the reverse, so that I can look at something and go, oh my god, like, yeah, I thought I had that nailed down. No, no,
Yeah,
no, no, no. That perspective is way off, or that, or
right.
that relationship somewhere. And
And
it
that's it.
also looks like I've got a family member of yours saying he also likes making his kids observe the paintings too. There sounds like a
Well,
funny story behind that one. Do you want to go a
yeah,
little
well,
further?
I'll just leave it at they get sick of me. And but what's interesting, again, different perspective, different set of eyes. Oh, hey, take a look at this. Yeah, Dad, that one eye's wrong. And you look at it and like, hmm. hate to admit it, but they're absolutely right. Very rarely are they wrong when they take a look at things. So yeah, you're always looking at that different perspective, and I think that that technique that you talk about, looking at something in the mirror, flipping it upside down, I think is also a very powerful one when you're trying to come up with your composition.
Yeah,
And you compose something and you look at it and you say, I kind of like this composition. Flip it in reverse and see if you still like the composition when it's in reverse. And if, it can be stronger or weaker in that reverse, but at least it'll give you, it'll just flipping that perspective will cause you to see it in a different way and make some better decisions. It's a great
I get.
technique.
I there's no argument for me for that. My wife is my best and worst critic. Again, whenever I think I've got something down, she usually comes out and says, that red's not right," and
Yeah.
then she's 10 times out of 10 right. And you know, and Sherry's commenting back in here. Mirror's a great idea. I use it, and I also use my son too. See, so that we're all parents. We're all
Yeah.
painters, and we're all we're all doing the same things together. This is fantastic. So let's kind of transition here for a second here, and I like asking a couple of pointed questions to
Sure.
people in these interviews, not to stump anybody, just as a general curiosity here. Um, if and this is one of my two favorite questions, so this shouldn't be a surprise to anybody that's watched a few of the interviews here. Forget language barriers. Just
Hmm.
assume that everybody can speak the same language. Is there one artist in particular throughout all of art history that if you could sit down, have a cup of coffee, breakfast, cocktail hour, dinner, whatever the case may be, is there one artist that just you would just die to sit down and have a conversation
Yeah.
with?
Yeah. That's an easy one for me. It would be Salvador Dali.
Oh,
So the whole idea of the fantasy when I was a kid and when I started really learning about fine art, I was obsessed with Salvador Dali. I loved his artwork. I loved the mix of realism and the fantastic and the surreal. Absolutely loved his work. I still he's probably my favorite artist. And the whole idea of your mind, something being real until you have the chance to check it. He was dealing with some things that couldn't necessarily explain everything, but were unnerving to him. I like some of the ideas that he was trying to work with. I Another thing too, along that same vein, Frank Frazetta would have been wonderful to meet. There was another science fiction artist that was around at that time named Boris Vallejo, who did very statuesque women and big muscle-bound guys. And 3 years ago, they had an imaginative realism conference at the Goggle Works in Reading, and I happened to be, I did an article in International Artist Magazine, and in that same issue, they did a story and it had Boris Vallejo and his wife, Julie Bell, who was one of his models and became a phenomenal artist in her own right. And I sent a note to them just saying, hey, not only was it cool to be in the magazine, but I was thrilled that I happened to be in the same magazine as you folks. Boris, I grew up copying his work too. And I had a chance to meet them at the conference, and they say you shouldn't meet your idols. This is one of the, it was wonderful actually getting a chance to meet some of my idols. Boris Vallejo was very warm and wonderful, and it was cool to get that chance to talk to him. So that was one that the Frazetta and Boris but Dolly would definitely be up there.
well, I mean, any one of them would be a fantastic evening, and just to sit there and say, "Hey, go ahead, talk. I'll listen to anything you have to say."
Sure.
How much of Dali's work have you seen? Have you managed to get down to St. Pete to go to the museum down there, or to Madrid?
No, haven't done either of those. There was a fantastic Dali exhibit in Philly. What was that? Probably about 10 or 15 years ago. And anytime I get to a museum where they have a Dali, I will definitely check it out. There's, one in the collection in Philadelphia. His Last Supper is down in DC, which is a really interesting painting. So anytime, one of the things I have to travel an awful lot of for work, and I go to an awful lot of museums. And anytime I'm in a museum, and I'm trying to find out do they have something of his, and if they do, I go check it out. But yeah, St. Pete and Madrid are definitely on the list.
Well, I can tell you that I've now, after coming back from Tampa St. Pete, I managed to pop into that museum down there. I've now been to both, and they are 100% worth all the pennies that it takes to get there, to go in and see them. They're just they did such a great job. I can't say enough about it, and I'm sorry to say that I'm not as well versed with Dali. I love his work. There's nothing about that in that way, but I walked away saying I feel like I know so much more about the man, what he was interested in, like just all the things about him as an artist. I felt like I walked away just going, wow, I should have known this, years ago.
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
we also have another comment here. Diane says, I find it helpful to take a photo of a painting in progress, and putting it in grayscale is great for assessing values.
Hmm.
That's actually a great comment. Thank you, Diane, for commenting in with that too. Is that something that you ever find yourself doing, working through any kind of value issues that you may or may not be having to do that? Because I can say I've actually never done that, but I want to try that just to see.
I haven't, but that's a fantastic idea.
Yes, that's the
It's
magic
funny.
of the internet. Now we have this whole great new thing that now I'm going to sit there and start working a painting and go, oh, no, I'm going to try this and just see how this works. If like what that does for the process.
Yeah,
Oh
it's funny.
wow.
I just giving that advice to somebody the other day who um, started talking to me about art and said, I really want to do it, but I'm afraid of color. And I'm like, well, forget color. Start drawing. Just grab a pencil and start drawing. And then once you get comfortable with drawing, do it on tone paper and add a white pencil and work your way up to color. It's interesting. There's a guy, I have a mechanic that works on my car, and he and his brother happen to race cars. They're wonderful people, just really, really cool guys. And he was talking about, they race Volvos on this circuit, and he was talking about how sees all these guys come on this circuit and buy cars, and the cars are way beyond their skill and capability. So they buy this super car, they buy a Porsche, and they'll take it out on the track, and they wipe out in a turn, and that they're done racing because they got scared. And he said you have to race within your means. They would take Volvos on the track and beat Porsches and Corvettes and all these really fancy cars, but he would control the parameters of it. He knew how to control the parameters of it. And when he got to a point where he couldn't make that car do anything anymore, that's when you upgrade. That's when you shift. And I said, it's an awful lot like that with art too. Keep it simple. Deal with your magenta, cyan, yellow, white, black. You really don't need anything else to get going. And then when you find that you're at the limit of what you can do and you want to add another parameter, then start adding your parameters. Learn your materials and keep it simple at first. I see a lot of parallel there. Your idea of just getting to the value scale, keep it simple, see the values, and then work the color is a fantastic idea.
And in all honesty, I do that. I start off all of my work with an underpainting. And I guess the question for you would be, without divulging too much of your process, right? Because everybody's got to have at least a secret or two somewhere.
Oh no, it's all
Um,
good.
yeah. Do you? Is that something how you start work? Like, because based on how much is going on, an educated guess for me would be that you work the drawing and then start to layer in values. Is that how that works?
It depends. It really depends. I do different things on different paintings. I use a lot of grids. Um, I noticed you guys, was it last week you were talking about Mancini in
Mm-hmm.
Philly? I'm a big fan as well, and
Likewise.
his use of grids. But yeah, a lot of work is in the composition and setting things up. If I'm doing this kind of a still life, and I will purposefully work to put, your contrasting colors. If I want your eye to come forward, my lightest lights and darkest darks. If I want your eye to go to a location, I'll use aerial perspective in a very like I'll take things that I want to sit back and I'll gray them and blue them out, use something the landscape painters do. I'll use that in a still life. I'll take things that are like duller and bluer and I'll move them to places where I want those things to kind of sit back in the painting. So I'm putting a lot of thought into what I'm putting, and then the subject matter of what I'm putting together is also important there. Um, the um, there are certain paintings that I've done. I have a bunch of paintings that are. Um, I used to go to the fights in Philadelphia. I have a bunch of paintings of boxing scenes, and those have come about. I'll do a lot of preliminary drawings there and really compose the things before I set them down. Um, I'm not putting in a value scale. I try to get the color premium. I'm trying to nail that on that first pass, and then I'll go in and do glazes and do comparisons to it. One thing I think that's really helped my painting, and this is a little tip, I read an article about somebody who was painting with mud, and I was just like, oh, that's kind of interesting. But at the time I'm looking at my turpentine jar, and there's all that sludge that's at the bottom of the turpentine jar, and I felt guilty, and what do I do with this stuff? An environmental concern. How do I dispose of it? And thinking about people who paint houses and stuff, like the first layer is always the tough one. That second layer goes on really well. I started taking that mud out of my turpentine jar and just laying that down as a base layer. And once I started doing that, I noticed such a better vibrance to my painting, that it's something that I now do for every painting. I put a very basic layer of that sludge down. I use that sludge before I paint. Some other little I'll give some of the tips and tricks. You find parallels outside of the work that we do day in and day out. I was always frustrated when I was trying to do real fine detail work using smaller brushes. I get, if I dip too deep into the turpentine, I would get turpentine in the ferrule. I go to paint and you get the dripping of the paint coming out of the ferrule. Watch the guys on TV doing pinstriping on motorcycles and cars using the extra long filberts. And I was like, ooh, that's kind of interesting. And so I started getting really extra long filberts, and I can really load those up and get a lot of coverage and get in and do real fine detail work. So if you see my brushes, you'll look at them and it's like, oh, they're a little weird, because I do use a lot of extra long filberts.
I have one. Oh, I've
It
got to
also
look
helps doing
for
those
it
straight
quickly
lines.
off screen. If I can't quite see it, I have no idea where it's at in all my paintbrushes. Well, I have that as well. I don't do a ton of portrait work anymore. That's what I started off doing. But to get all those fine detail layers of hair, it's a detail brush that it's got to at least be about 6 inches long.
Yeah,
But you can load it up and then just lightly drag it. But you get that perfect line of
yeah,
hair, and then so then you just sit there for hours, just going like this, and that motion of whatever you wanted to do. But um,
sure.
so uh, first off, we just have to I have to laugh, right? Painting with mud. I'm gonna remember that like for days now. Like, oh,
Yeah,
you know what I want to do? I just go play in the mud, right? I guess we're all kids at heart in some way, shape, or form, right?
right.
Um, so I try to keep these to about a half hour. We've already gone on for about 45 minutes, so we may as well just go on a little bit longer and call it an hour, right?
Right on.
One of the other questions that I enjoy asking people, and I'm curious about this with you, is there one particular painting that you've done, or drawing, or just anything in creative like that, that you just refuse to sell? It's yours. It has to stay with you. You'll pass it down in the family. Uh, it looks like there's a yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's an easy answer. I have so many drawings of my kids and my wife that I'll never. I mean, they'll stay in the family. They're entirely personal. But quite frankly, I think you appreciate this. You fall in love with every painting that you're working on. I think I do have a hard time parting with my work. I want whoever is going to get that work to be as in love with it as I am. I've had some folks make an offer on Taste of Home that are from the outside the area and they don't really understand the area, and I'm, I don't know if they can fully appreciate the painting as much as somebody from our area who looks at that and like, yeah, pork roll, you got to put three slits in it. You've got to make sure you cut those. I don't know if somebody outside the area will appreciate it as much. So I'd have a hard time parting with it. An interesting, a little story. I did a painting when I lived in Houston as a gag gift for a guy that I was working with, and They wanted it to be really salty and it was a gag gift. So I painted this guy almost like the old Burt Reynolds and Joe Namath kind of tastefully nude, laying on a bearskin rug, and it looked like a black velvet painting. And did a painting of this guy as a gag. He had it hanging in his basement for years, and I went back to this guy a number of years back and said, you know what? I never took a picture of that painting. Is there any way you can snap a shot of it and send it to me? And he's like, you're not going to believe this. He's like, my wife finally had enough of that painting and we threw it out. And that was like, just like dagger in the heart. It's like, you know what? I would have bought that thing back off of you because it was, I had a lot of fun and I learned something putting that painting together. But it did strike me. It was like, it was a goofy painting, not a big deal. But the fact that it wasn't around anymore, it did. I mean, you fall in love with the work. You want folks to enjoy it as much as you do.
Well, and you can't throw out Bandit. I mean, like that's sacrilegious. If you're a
Exactly.
kid of the '70s or '80s, that's just you can't do that. That's not allowed. We're seeing the practice of oil painting is commenting in, saying hi. Hello, everybody out there tuning in. Thank you again for tuning in. 5 o'clock every Thursday. We're coming to you live with you, the members of the American Artists Professional League. We're talking with Steve, another Pennsylvania artist, another Philly area guy. We can talk about all of these things. So I have to ask a couple of pointed questions that deal with all of this.
Right.
Why haven't you done a painting of a Mac and Manco's pizza pie so that everybody out there can see the best pizza in the world? I know why I haven't is because there's no way that I could look at it for that long without eating it. So
There actually, I do have in my painting, it's a still life like this of all kinds of South Jersey things. It's called Down the Shore. And in there is a Mac and Manco's box. And there is my son in there eating a Manco and Manco's pizza in the painting. And it also has Johnson's popcorn and Coors ice cream and all the South Jersey favorites are represented appropriately in that painting.
perfect. So you're better than me because there's no way that I would be able to just not look at it and go, I can't paint it. I just have to eat it.
Well,
You
that's
try
the
to work on a
fun.
photograph or something, but
My when I did this one and I had to lay out on my dining room table, my kids all fought for what part of the still life they got to eat when I was finished setting it up.
well, and it's great because when we talk about promoting traditional realism art here with the American Artists Professional League, and there's other sister organizations that have very similar goals to us, and we partner with them a
Hmm.
lot. I've had people come up to me and say, how can you call yourself traditional when, John, you're painting ice cream cones, Steve, you're over here painting contemporary food set up like a still life? And I've said to people, multiple times, like, well, you can use traditional techniques. Part of the
Sure,
fun is then what are you doing with that, right? The world is filled with people who at some point in time or another have done very traditional type of work, and that's a great way to learn. I learned that way. So many people have. I'm not discounting that at all. I am saying I think part of the fun of being creative is saying, let me take this and then run with it over here.
yeah,
For me at least, and this is kind of, I think we're kind of kinship in this way, where we're taking something that has a bit of a gaudy, very American kind of feel, if you will,
yeah,
and taking it and saying, hey, it's there's something fun and creative about saying I worked very traditionally, and then it's this. For
yeah.
me, it's I'm painting rainbow jimmies, and yes, for everybody out there, there's a difference between sprinkles and jimmies. They are called jimmies.
Jimmy's,
Trust me on this, people. I'm
correct.
going to settle the debate now. It's jimmies, not sprinkles. Okay. Um, but there's something funny about that because when people look at my work, and I imagine it's something similar to yours, they kind of almost pass over all of the work, and they're going
Sure.
and they're hitting that nostalgia, which I'm going to make an assumption here and go out on a bit of a limb. that's kind of the point, right? With what you're
Sure.
doing, you're saying like, yes, I want you to relate to this. You know, you have this memory of this food object. So do I, you know, and we can share about that. And there's something great about that sharing. And that's really what art is about. It's about sharing, right?
We're communicating. Right on,
Yeah.
man. I love when people take a look, walk by, and then go back and they're like, wait a second, what is? And I also love the questions about things that are in the painting. I love the when people have curiosity about it, want to explore more. I love when it just makes people tie into things that they remember from their childhood. Something like Taste of Home. I love when I have buddies from outside the area that'll look at it and say, wait a minute, you got to talk to me a little bit. What is this scrapple stuff? And what is pork roll? I mean, even up, what's interesting in Berks County, um, my mom, when I started talking to her about pork rolls, she's like, "What's pork roll?" And so I was like, "Oh, mom, I got to get some for you. We got to try this." But in Berks County, it's not a party unless there's ring bologna there. And you talk to somebody, South Jersey, North Jersey, and you say ring bologna, they're looking at you like, "What are you talking about?" But in Berks County, it's not a party unless there's Munster cheese and ring bologna to start it off.
Oh,
It's
that's like being from Philly and living down here in Southern Delaware. I talk about tomato pie, and people
oh
just
yeah.
look at me and they think like, "Wait, a pie of tomatoes?" And they kind of look at you with that, like, "That does not sound good." I'm like, "No, no,
Right.
no, trust me, you're not thinking about it in the way that it actually really
Yeah.
is."
Corporalese tomato pie. Right
That's
on, man. I'm there
it,
for
right?
that
You
any
can't say
day of the
no to
week.
it. So
Yeah.
but it's a great quality, and I'm stressing this out at here, kind of towards the end of our conversation, because I'm hoping that for the people that are tuning in again live, thank you again, and that'll come across this at some point. You know, we are not necessarily focused on you have to just do traditional and that's it, right? It's taking those traditional methods, traditional ideas, and incorporating them in some way into who you are, right? You know,
That's the
and I'll just
key.
say specifically for me, it's all about the drawing. Like you can see here, like I've got the drawings are worked. I'll work underpainting layers. I'll do glazes, you know, and we're talking the same thing because you're doing the same thing as well for you. I just think it's great. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah.
Granted, I'm probably a little on the bias side because we're talking about the same things here. But I just want to stress that out there to people that are watching this and they're thinking maybe like, well, maybe I don't quite fit with the American Artists Professional League. Join anyway. Send your application in. Let us be the quote unquote judge, if you will, for that. I think there's a lot more fun things that can happen with traditional realism oriented art. And I just want to say thank you for coming on tonight and talking with us and helping to facilitate that. I talk about the American Artists Professional League everywhere I go. I'm out there doing outdoor art festivals pretty much all year long, up from
Hmm.
Florida all the way up. I'll be in Westport, Connecticut in a few weeks, and I promote the AAPL because I think there's great value in being a member and connecting with other like-minded artists. And I had somebody say something to the effect of, "Well, I don't think I fit because I'm not traditional." And I went, "Well, talk a little bit more about that. What does that mean, right?"
Right.
Like looking at me, I'm like, "Well, I don't necessarily fit exactly into that, you know, that kind of very bland traditional, and that's okay if that's what you are, right?" But I'm just, this is a long-winded way of saying thank you for coming on and sharing your work and yourself and your journey, because I think you're another example of how you can mold traditional with something fun and fresh.
Awesome. I thank you for having me, and it's been a privilege to get a chance to talk to you folks. Now, I can't let you get away without asking the $1 million question, though. Favorite cheesesteak place?
Well, it depends where I'm at. If I'm back home in South Philly, it's got to be John's Roast Pork on Snyder.
Oh yeah, John's roast pork, and
But it's a different
their
type of
roast.
steak sandwich
It
because they
is.
use a different roll. And
Yep.
I tell this to people all the time. If you're in South Philly, it's a harder roll.
Yep.
They also use broccoli and they use provolone. So it's a very different type of a steak sandwich. Now,
Yep.
if I had to choose, which is, this is like impossible to choose, right?
Yep.
But if I had to, Pudge's in Bluebell. It's a
Uh,
little outside of the city, but first off, their large is ginormous.
yeah.
And actually, the secret into that is that it's even better when it's reheated in the oven. I tell this to people, and I'm sure you know. You keep it wrapped up in the tin foil, you toss it back in the oven, the bread gets
Seems it.
crispy, everything recongeals. I swear it tastes even better reheated.
Wow, that's a good tip. Have you ever been? I'm there with you on John's. I like their roast pork. I love their cheesesteaks. I when I bring people in from out of town, you got to take them to Geno's and Pat's so they get the full experience, and you get one from each and try them both. Have you had Angelo's
So right
down in the
there on
Italian
Ninth
market?
Street. So they are the
Yeah,
best pizza in all of Philly, hands down. I actually just ran into a guy that knows the owner down here in Delaware, and we were laughing and
yeah.
talking about it. Um, there's a
Fresh
whole
bread.
lot that I can unpack about Angelo's. They are right up there too. That's why I say it kind of depends. There's always going to be somebody that has like a little like
Yeah,
different take, if you will. But best pizza, Angelo's. And if you don't feel like driving down to John's, or for everybody out there that's maybe curious and they're going to try this, if you're not at John's roast pork by about 1:30, you got to go back the next day.
yeah.
She's
Now,
close by
for
too.
me, for my money, my favorite pizza in Philadelphia is Tankinelli's on Somerset, north of the city.
Mm.
You have to call a day in advance just to reserve the dough. If you just show up, they won't serve you. You have to make sure you reserve the dough a day in advance. But crushed tomato and spinach pie there, spectacular. And cheesesteak, actually, for my money, my favorite is the White House in Atlantic City.
Oh, I
The
don't know that.
Italian, oh, it's a fantastic place. And kind of like your place where the half a sandwich is the size is bigger than most people's whole sandwich. And the weird little quirk there is they actually will go in and they make their own bread and they actually rip out the center of the roll so that they can fit more stuff into the sandwich. And when they put their Italian hoagies are phenomenal. It's a hoagie. When they put their meats and stuff in the sandwich, they'll take iceberg lettuce and take a head of lettuce and just rip hunks out of it and just put it on the hoagie. Spectacular place. It's well worth it in Atlantic City on Arctic Avenue. But yeah,
Dude,
we got to
now
talk some
my
more.
taste
I'm
buds
getting
are
hungry.
tingling. I'm gonna have to take the ferry from Lewis to Cape May just to go on purpose, just to go get a bunch of good food now on purpose. So, all right.
Right
Well,
on.
so
Well, I'm looking forward to
Steve,
continuing
we
this.
could talk for another like 4 hours. I feel like, and I think we're gonna have to get together and just sort of shoot the breeze the next time I'm going
Yeah,
up to
man.
visit my mother-in-law. But one of the things I like doing here at the end is giving you the platform to talk about where people can see your work at. You're here on Instagram. You have a website. You have any
Yep.
shows coming up? Are you going to be doing anything that maybe you can give us a sneak peek about?
Sure.
Floor is yours.
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram, Steve Scheuring. I'm on Facebook at Steve Scheuring and Steve Scheuring Fine Art. Please come check me out. I'm waiting here on a couple of shows right now. One group show, you're talking about great other organizations. This painting is going to be up in Connecticut at the Hudson Valley Art Association show that's coming up over the next 2 months. It should open up. I'm also on the board of directors for the Allied Artists of America, and will be very actively participating in their national show. Again, I consider a sister organization, AAPL, similar focus. Upcoming work, I have a few still lifes coming up. One that's a self portrait with all kinds of objects. Another one that is Philly themed still life that I'm pretty excited. I'm collecting objects as we speak. And this painting is part of a series of paintings that I've done called Tastes of Home. And I've done 30 individual portraits so far of individual food items on smaller canvases, and probably have another 30 to do. So I am looking forward to continuing to extend that series and keep the conversation going. Thank you for this opportunity, John. Really nice to meet you, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.
100%. It was my pleasure to talk to another Philly area guy here. Actually, and I wonder if there's historically some reasons. I can at least think of a few in my head, because I'd say if I had to put into some kind of percentages, definitely by far the most people that I've interviewed with on the platform here with members are Pennsylvania, southeastern Pennsylvania, greater Philadelphia area people. I mean, historically, you can talk about New Hope. You can talk about the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Art. You can
Yeah,
talk about
the
guys like
Brandywine.
Thomas Hogan, even, let alone all the other bigwigs and everybody else down in Delaware County and everything. So,
Sure.
in that respect, I feel like there's definitely a strong connection, if you will, with that area, and then realism oriented art. So. It's always great for me, right? Because whenever I feel just a tad bit homesick and say, well, I don't really want to move back. I love it, but I love where I live now. I can get it back on here and listen to one of these interviews and go, ah, these are my people. We can talk about all these fun things and love on it and share it with everybody else, right? Because sharing,
Right on.
whether it's with the best cheesesteaks in South Philly or whether it's amazing traditional realism art with here at the AAPL, it's all about sharing. Steve, thank you very much. It was my
Thank
pleasure,
you,
as I
John.
said. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for all of your comments. And we'll be back at this next Thursday, 5 o'clock, with you, the members of the American Artist Professional League. Till then, see you later, everybody.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, John.